Hi booktube, Aaron here. Hope you're doing okay. Recently, I think over the last 2 or 3 months, I've been on a bit of a book buying diet. It's not been a strict ban or anything too severe like that, but I have been trying to limit the number of books, the number of physical books that I'm letting into the house. And recently I was on holiday, and like with a, a normal diet, I suppose it kind of goes out the window when you're on holiday. You know, with food, it's harder to control what you're eating, and it's certainly harder to control what you're buying. And so I've come back with an excessive book haul of shame that I am not really feeling too shameful about at all. Um, but in fact, actually, there are actually some books that turned up before I went on holiday, so I can't blame the holiday too much, but it definitely went up a notch on the holiday. Um, so I'll go through the kind of different places I got them from, I suppose, and I'll start off with that trickling of books that turned up before I left. The first one is a history book, and I will say, I one way in which I'm kind of sticking to the book buying ban, or the way I'm trying to control this flurry of book buying, has been I have been trying to really limit the amount of fiction I'm buying. So there is some fiction in here, um, but I want to focus on poetry and history and things like that. So um, yeah, it's not all fiction. And this first one is a work of history, and it's one I've had my eye on for a little while, and I saw it on a shelf in a bookshop and just went for it. And it's The House of Government by Yuri Slezkine, or Slezkini. I think it's Slezkine, but let me know if you know. And yeah, it's about I think like a hotel, or a building where sort of, I think during the purges after the Russian Revolution, um, people were sort of sent as kind of like a purgatory, I suppose. And I've heard it kind of reads like a big, fat Russian novel, but it's all based on diaries and letters and things, and it just looks really cool as well. Like I maybe would have read it as a ebook, but um, I love reading history on my Kindle, but there's one I also just really wanted to own because it looks so cool. So the House of Government. I don't know when I'll get to it. I am quite itching to get to it, so it might be sooner or later. I might move a few things I've got planned to squeeze it in, or I don't know. It's quite hard to squeeze in a book when it's that big. And then we've got three poetry books that I picked up before I left for my holidays. Um, and I have been looking at my poetry books recently, and although there are a fair few books that I haven't read yet, there was nothing that was really calling me, and I felt like I needed to get to immediately. And I felt like um, just filling up a bit and bolstering it a little bit. Um, and so I've gone with a book by someone I know, something just a shot in the dark, really, and then something else. So we've got Rain by Don Patterson. This came out in 2009. I think quite a few times in bookshops I've read the title poem of this, I think, and been really quite impressed with it. Yeah, is it the last poem? It might be. Yeah, I've read the title poem and was really impressed with it. And Dawn Patterson is one of those poets that I have in just places here and there read random poems. I've got his version of Rilke's sonnets for Orpheus, but I haven't really owned anything that's just his own stuff purely, and so I'll give that a go. Then we've got The Golden Gate by Vikram Seth, which is, I don't know, the modern version of an epic poem, I suppose. It's sort of labelled as a novel in verse, I think, which I find funny. It's a long poem telling a story, and I've seen it pop up quite a lot, and I always assumed that it was relatively recent. I think I've only been seeing it in shops in the last couple of years, maybe because in the UK it's been recently reprinted. I'm not sure, but yeah, I assumed it was more or less brand new, and it's actually from the 80s. So yeah, we'll see. It was really kind of quite a whimsical buy, but I just wanted something a bit different to go into. And then I picked up New Selected Poems by Vernon Watkins, a poet I've been intrigued by for a while. And this has got a bit of a funny story. So recently I was reading an anthology of apocalyptic poetry, and Vernon Watkins was in there, and my favourite an excerpt from my favourite Vernon Watkins poem, The Ballad of the Mary Lloyd, was in there, and I thought it's a shame that it's just an excerpt, and you can download a PDF for free online, and the format's a bit funny on Kindle, so I could just have the whole poem on my Kindle, but I thought it would be nice, if his selected poems are available, to get it, and it should have the whole of the Ballad of the Mary Lloyd in there. And then I looked, and it's just an excerpt. It's a slightly longer excerpt, but it's still just like 5 pages from a 20-page poem, which is quite frustrating. But I did enjoy some of the other poems that are in there, so I know there's going to be stuff I'm going to enjoy in here as well. So it's not the end of the world. But the actual collection that the Ballad of the Mary Lloyd was in originally is, you can only get the really old editions online, it seems, and they're quite pricey. So I don't think I'll be getting that anytime soon. So they're the books that trickled in before I went on holiday, and then when I went on holiday, there were, I think, 3 different places that I picked up books from. The first one was just a second-hand bookstall at a market, and there wasn't much there that I wanted to get, but I saw this. This is If This Is a Man and the Truths by Primo Levi, or Levi, I suppose it would be Levi. And I've heard a lot about him, but yeah, I've never read anything by him, so I thought it'd be good to have both of those together. And again, I don't have any plans to get to it immediately, but I thought it was one that was good to get, and it was nice and cheap. And then we were staying in a village that had a couple of bookshops, and so there was one bookshop that was your usual independent new bookshop, and the other one was a bit of a sort of tourist shop, but sold a lot of books, and there are a few second-hand books there, I think, but it seems like it mainly sold remainders, and so they're sort of like new books but at second-hand prices, and that was very exciting, and you'll probably see how mad I went with those. But I got 2 new books from the smaller independent bookshop, and they were both non-fiction. I picked up Keats' A Brief Life in 9 Poems and 1 Epitaph by Lucasta Miller. I just thought it'd be cool to read a biography of Keats, and I suppose it's not just a biography, but a sort of reading and evaluation of his poems. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to this. Don't know when I'll get to it, but I'm looking forward to it. And then I got The Wild Places by Robert Macfarlane, which, again, I'm excited to get to. He's essentially trying to go out into He's walking out into Britain to see if there are actually any purely wild places left. I think it's actually Britain and Ireland. Yeah, so he's wondering whether agriculture and urban planning and whatever have sort of rendered our sort of wildness extinct, I suppose. So yeah, I really enjoyed Underland by him, and I haven't read anything else, but that was just one of those books that, yeah, I don't know, kind of unlocked something in me, and just really, really loved. And his approach is quite cool because his books feel like investigations that use travel writing to unlock whatever he's trying to talk about. So I don't know if I'm explaining him very well, but he's a nature writer and a travel writer, but there's always something he's sort of investigating. I suppose that's always how it goes, but it seems particularly sort of potent in Macfarlane. And then all the rest of the books are from that other bookshop where they sold some new books, maybe some secondhand books, but loads of remainder books as well. And then this one is one I picked up because, like, the day before, Jasmine, my wife, said she might be interested in reading it if she found it, and it's The Satsuma Complex by Bob Mortimer. And I'd be intrigued to read this as well, just because he's a comedian here in the UK and he's very funny, so I'm sure it'd be a lot of fun. And then I also picked up on the same day Radical Wordsworth, The Poet Who Changed the World by Jonathan Bates. And I haven't read a biography of Wordsworth, and I have read other things by Jonathan Bates and have really enjoyed them. So yeah, I thought this would be good. And then yeah, the rest are, I think, all remainders or secondhand, and essentially those last two I bought them on the same day as the Keats book and the Robert Macfarlane book. Me and my dad had snuck off to go find some books, and at that second bookshop, when I went with my dad, we just went inside, but they do have some trolleys with loads and loads of books outside, and we just didn't get around to reading them or to looking through them when we visited. So I went again the next day and found that they had tons of poetry and tons of books from American publishers. There's lots of FSG books and poetry books from Grey Wolf Press, and just lots of interesting publishers that you don't see quite so often over here in the UK. So that was another reason for me to go a little bit mad. I'll start with the fiction. There are two here, and these are ones that caught Jasmine's eye, and they're, I suppose, the first two parts to a series, and I'm assuming there must be more. So we've got Emperor of the Eight Islands, and it's by Leon Hearn, and it's down here as book one, the tale of Shikanko. And then the next one is Autumn Princess Dragon Child. And I think they're kind of reimaginings of Japanese mythology. So it's a fun imagined version of the medieval Japanese world. And they look really cool. I love these cover illustrations, and I believe if I put them the right way around, that the spines will start making there'll be a picture running along the spine if you collect them all. So I'll have to see if there are more of these, just for the aesthetics. Then I've got Territory of Light by Yuko Tsushima, and I think I've heard of this, and I'm not sure where, but I was reading on the back that it won like a prestigious prize in Japan in the 70s. And yeah, it was originally published in 12 parts in a literary sort of journal in the 70s. And I don't know, there's something about the story of how it came out and the impact it had that kind of rang a bell. And it's about, I think it's like a young woman, yeah, sort of left alone. So her husband has run off, and she's raising a child by her own. And it might have just been that it was a lovely addition and it was ringing a bell. Somewhere in the back of my head I'd heard someone talk about it, but I can't remember where. This is one that I don't think I've heard of before, but I read the back and it sounded good and also just looks really cool. It's The Death of Artemio Cruz by Carlos Fuentes. So this is a sort of Citizen Kane kind of thing by the sounds of it. A guy in his deathbed remembering his life, so not quite the same but kind of close. But I think it has so there's going to be stuff about the Mexican Revolution in there. So it sounds interesting, in an area of history I don't really know anything about, an author I don't really know anything about, and a book that looks and sounds very cool. Another one that stood out to Jasmine, and it's always fun when books stand out to Jasmine because I feel less guilty about buying loads of books. This is The Taxidermist's Daughter by Kate Moss, and I think I've owned this before and then got rid of it because I didn't feel like I was going to read it. But we picked it up, and now that it's turned up a second time, I'm a little more intrigued to read it. It seems like I'm not even sure. I mean, with a sort of title like that and sort of vibe it's giving me, and from what I can remember I think I might have started actually reading it. It seemed very dark and atmospheric, maybe a kind of mystery thing. I'm trying to remember. But anyway, we'll see if I read it. Maybe I'll have to get rid of it another time and then buy it a third time, and then maybe then that'll be the catalyst to read it. And then I've got a healthy pile of more poetry books. There are a few poets in here I've read before, a few that are more or less totally new to me. Some I've heard of, but I've just never read yet. So the first one is a poet I've read before, and I might make this the next poetry book I read. It's Duende by Tracy K. Smith. So I read her collection Sci-Fi not too long ago, and she seems like a very confident and articulate poet. So we'll see how I get on with this. But I quite enjoyed Sci-Fi, so I expect I'll enjoy this. This is one where I'd seen the name around a bit, but I don't think I've ever read anything by him before, so it's a bit of a stab in the dark, a shot in the dark for me. But it's Gulf Music by Robert Pinsky. No idea really. From the sounds of things, it's very politically infused, and I think it's going to be sort of the politics of the early sort of 2000s. Yes, well, this is 2007, and so I think there's going to be, from the sounds of things, it's like from the sort of Persian Gulf all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. He's kind of invoking in here, so I'm sure it's going to have quite a few political resonances. This is a poet I've heard of, and I've sort of watched videos of like readings of other poets, and he's the guy introducing them, and he gives the impression of being a very, very generous and again articulate person. And this is Reconnaissance by Carl Phillips. And I think for a while he may have been the editor of Poetry Magazine, or one of the editors. I don't really know anything at all about Carl Phillips and have never read anything by him, so I'm looking forward to getting to know his poetry. The only downside about the bookshop I got these from is that they did put stickers on the front of all their books, and this is the only one that really got damaged when I was trying to take the stickers off. We're nearly there now. This one, again, this is a poet I haven't heard of, had no idea what to expect, but it just looked like an interesting poetry collection. It's called Second Childhood by Fanny Howe. Haven't heard of Fanny Howe before, but yeah, it sounds interesting. And she's described as, it was just something about the way someone was describing her poetry, marked by the pressures of history and culture, yet defiantly, transcendently lyrical. So that might be very hyperbolic, but we'll see. So Fanny Howe, Second Childhood. I think this is one where the cover just intrigued me, and then finding out a little bit about the poet from the back and a bit about the collection. Yeah, it intrigued me as well. This is Henry Cole, and it's Nothing to Declare. And I sort of had a look through, and from what I could see of the poetry, it looked interesting. And also, yeah, Harold Bloom said that Henry Cole has become a master poet with few peers, a central poet of his generation. So I'm hoping he's at least kind of decent. So we'll see. And then again, a poet I just hadn't heard of. It looked interesting. That the book looks just like a beautiful book. And I opened this up to a couple of random poems and really liked them. So this is the Sailing the Forest, the selected poems of Robin Robertson, who's a poet from Scotland, and yeah, it just seems really, really good, and it's just poems that I don't know, just the kind of poems I love, where I don't know, where it's really, really hard to describe what they are, but they just feel right, and even if there isn't an obvious form to them, there's just something very right about the way they feel after you've read them. You feel sort of satisfied after having finished them, and so I think he might be a fun and exciting new discovery for me. Then this is one I didn't completely need, but then I thought, why not? I've already bought enough books already, and they at this bookshop they had like what was it, like 3 books for £5 or something like that. So it was very easy to buy a lot of books without spending too much money. This is the selected poems of Paul Muldoon. So there are going to be poems in here that I've already got in other collections, because out of sort of poets that are still alive, he's probably the best represented in my collection. But it's also got stuff from sort of the gaps, so I'll be able to sort of fill in some of those gaps a little bit, and it'll be a bit of a reconnaissance into the stuff of his I haven't got yet. And then the last book is, I think this will be really, really good as well. This is the Aeneid, book number 6, translated by Seamus Heaney. And this was I think the last thing that he worked on before he died, and so his family found it more or less complete after he died, and I think I haven't read the Aeneid yet, so just from the title, I'd have no idea, no idea what it's going to be about, but from looking at the back, it's essentially the section where Aeneas goes down into the underworld, and I think speaks with his father. Yeah, he goes there to meet his father, and I think it had a particular resonance to Heaney as well. So yeah, this will be good, and maybe it will finally push me into actually reading the Aeneid. So we'll see. But there we go. That is my book haul of shame for today. This really over the top failure on my part to control my book buying habits. But it was still a lot of fun. It's a bit too big to do a big old stack because I've got, tiny sort of chicken arms. Well, I have more arms than a chicken could ever have. But anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you found something interesting in here. If you've read any of these, please let me know what you think, any recommendations or anything you think I should watch out for. But yeah, for now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you very soon. Bye.